In a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other's story, a marriage took place that no one saw coming. A young black boy, barely a teenager, stood beside a woman much older than him, minus 65 years old to be exact. They were surrounded by a few friends and family members, but the rest of the world watched from a distance, confused and filled with questions. The boy's name was Jamal, and despite his young age, there was a quiet maturity in his eyes that contrasted with the innocence of his appearance. The woman standing next to him was Clara, a kind and elegant woman who had lived a long, full life. Her hair had turned silver with age, and her skin, though weathered by time, still radiated a quiet beauty. Clara was a widow, having lost her husband many years ago, and had lived alone for a long time. Her days were spent in the solitude of her home, surrounded by memories of her past. She never expected to fall in love again, especially not with someone so much younger. But when she met Jamal, something changed. It was a chance meeting, a simple conversation that turned into something much deeper. Jamal was an orphan, raised by his grandmother after his parents passed away. He was a bright, kind-hearted boy, but life had not been easy for him. The harsh realities of the world often weighed heavily on his young shoulders, yet he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed far beyond his years. Jamal had met Clara during one of his visits to the local library, where he would read to escape from the troubles of his daily life. Clara, who frequented the library as well, was drawn to his presence. She noticed his gentle nature and the way he would lose himself in the pages of a book. Over time, their conversations grew longer, and their bond grew stronger. Clara admired Jamal's resilience and innocence, while Jamal found comfort in Clara's wisdom and the peace she seemed to radiate. As their friendship deepened, Jamal found himself caring for Clara in a way he had never experienced before. She listened to him without judgment, offering advice and love in ways that no one else had. Clara, on the other hand, found herself captivated by Jamal's youthful energy and the hope he seemed to carry with him. The age gap between them no longer seemed to matter. In their conversations, they were equals, bound by a connection that transcended age. But the relationship was not without its challenges. People in the community began to gossip. The whispers started slowly at first, murmurs in the streets, exchanged looks at church, and hushed conversations in the local coffee shop. Why would a young boy like Jamal marry someone so much older? They asked. What does he see in her? Some even questioned Clara's intentions, suggesting that perhaps she had a hidden agenda. Was this a scheme to inherit her wealth or her property? The rumors didn't faze Jamal or Clara. To them, the connection they shared was pure and simple. But the judgment from others began to take its toll on Jamal. He was still a child, and although he was wise beyond his years, the harshness of the world outside their quiet bond started to erode his sense of peace. Clara, too, began to feel the weight of the community's opinions, but her love for Jamal was unwavering. She knew that their relationship wasn't about age or what others thought. It was about the deep affection they shared. Finally, after months of discussions, debates, and deep soul-searching, Jamal and Clara decided to marry. The wedding was small, with only a handful of friends and family members in attendance. The ceremony took place in the same garden, where they had spent countless afternoons talking and laughing. The sky was clear, and the soft breeze rustled through the trees, creating an atmosphere of serenity and quiet anticipation. As they exchanged vows, there was a moment of silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Jamal, with his youthful face and nervous smile, stood by Clara, his hand in hers. Clara, her eyes glistening with tears, looked at Jamal as if he were her entire world. It was a moment of profound connection, a moment that transcended the boundaries of age, time, and expectation. For Jamal, this was a leap of faith. He was young, and many would say he was too young to understand the magnitude of what he was doing. But Jamal felt something deep inside him, a certainty that this was right. Clara, too, had spent years alone, but now she felt that her life had meaning again. Together, they had found something beautiful, something rare, an unconditional bond that no one could tear apart. And so, with the vows spoken and the rings exchanged, they were married. As they walked away from the altar, hand in hand, the community still buzzed with gossip and disbelief. But Jamal and Clara were unfazed. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. The unexpected marriage of a young boy and an older woman had become a reality, and it was just the beginning of their journey together. As the days passed after the wedding, the initial joy of their union began to fade into a quiet tension. The once peaceful days spent in conversation and laughter now felt heavier. Jamal, despite his deep love for Clara, couldn't ignore the growing unease within him. His heart was conflicted, torn between the love he felt for his wife and the nagging doubts that had started to creep into his mind. At first, everything seemed perfect. Clara was kind and gentle, always there with comforting words when the world felt too harsh. Jamal found himself more and more drawn to her wisdom, her calm demeanor that seemed to calm the chaos in his life. But as the days turned into weeks, Jamal began to notice things he hadn't before. Clara, who once seemed open and transparent, was now distant and secretive. There were moments when she would disappear for hours, and when she returned, she would act as though nothing had happened, as though it was completely normal for her to vanish without explanation. Jamal tried to ignore it at first. He thought it was just his overactive imagination, or maybe his insecurities as a young husband. After all, he had never been in a relationship like this before. But the unease grew, and so did the questions in his mind. Where did Clara go during those long absences? Why was she so reluctant to share the details of her day? He began to feel like there was a wall between them, one that wasn't there before their marriage. One evening, Jamal asked Clara about her day, trying to keep his voice casual, but his concern slipped through. "Where were you earlier? I didn't see you around," he asked, his eyes searching hers for any sign of the truth. Clara, who had been sitting by the window, looking out at the setting sun, hesitated for a moment before replying. "I just went for a walk," she said, her voice calm and steady, but her eyes didn't meet his. The answer was simple enough, but it didn't satisfy Jamal. There was something in her tone, something in the way she avoided his gaze, that made him uneasy. The following days brought more of the same. Clara would go for walks, disappear for hours, and when she returned, she would be distant, almost cold. Jamal began to question everything. Was it just him? Was he overthinking? Or was Clara hiding something? His heart told him that he loved her, but his instincts were telling him that something wasn't right. As the days went on, Jamal noticed more strange behavior. Clara's once vibrant and open personality seemed to be fading, replaced by a quiet, almost secretive demeanor. She stopped talking about her past, the one she had shared with him so freely before their marriage. Whenever Jamal asked about her childhood, her family, or her life before they met, she would change the subject, her smile becoming tight and forced. Jamal tried to brush it off, telling himself that it was just her way of protecting herself, of keeping things hidden. After all, they had only been married for a short time, and he knew that people had their own secrets, things they weren't always ready to share. But still, the doubts gnawed at him, refusing to let go. One night, Jamal couldn't sleep. The darkness of the room seemed to weigh heavily on his mind, and his thoughts raced. Clara had gone for another one of her walks that evening, and this time, something about her absence felt different. He had tried to distract himself, but the questions continued to circle in his mind. He decided to follow her. Quietly, he slipped out of bed and grabbed his jacket. The night was cool, and the streets were empty, the only sound the distant chirping of crickets. He moved silently through the neighborhood, his footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath his shoes. He kept his distance, not wanting Clara to know he was following her. As he walked, he began to feel a mix of guilt and anxiety. Was this really necessary? Was he invading her privacy? But the doubts were too strong, too consuming. He needed answers, even if they were painful. He couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was hiding something from him, something that he needed to know. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw her ahead of him. Clara was walking briskly down the street, her head lowered, and her posture rigid. Jamal's heart raced as he tried to stay out of sight, hiding behind trees and parked cars. He followed her for what felt like miles, until she finally stopped at a small run-down building on the outskirts of town. She hesitated for a moment before entering. Jamal's stomach twisted. He had never seen this part of town before, and it didn't seem like a place for someone like Clara to be. The building was old, with peeling paint and broken windows. It looked abandoned, but Clara had walked inside without a second thought. Jamal stood in the shadows, watching the door, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What was Clara doing here? Why had she come to this place? And why hadn't she told him about it? The questions flooded his mind, each one more urgent than the last. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, his body frozen by the fear of what he might discover. The door to the building opened, and Clara stepped out, looking over her shoulder as if she were making sure no one was watching. She quickly disappeared into the night, leaving Jamal standing alone, his heart pounding in his chest. He had his answer. The doubts that had been growing in his mind for weeks were no longer just doubts. Clara was hiding something from him, something that was clearly significant. What could it be? And why had she kept it from him for so long? Jamal stood in the shadows, his thoughts racing. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. This marriage, this relationship, was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The weight of the unanswered questions hung heavy in Jamal's heart. Every moment since that night when he had followed Clara to the old building had been filled with an unbearable tension. He couldn't shake the image of Clara sneaking into that strange, dilapidated place. The more he thought about it, the more he knew something was terribly wrong. The trust he once had in her was now shadowed by doubt and suspicion. Jamal's mind raced, and each passing day only made the mystery deepen. The following week, Clara seemed more distant than ever. She was still the same caring woman in the public eye, but Jamal noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. She was quieter, more withdrawn, and her smile, once so warm, now seemed forced. There were still those unexplained absences, those long walks she would take without telling him where she was going. And every time Jamal tried to approach her with questions, Clara would shut him down with a soft, "I'm fine, Jamal. It's just a lot to think about." Jamal couldn't let it go. The worry gnawed at him, the fear of what Clara was hiding growing with each passing day. He had tried to talk to her, but her responses always seemed to deflect his suspicions. He loved her deeply, but the fear of losing her to something he couldn't understand began to overwhelm him. One afternoon, as Jamal was cleaning the house, he found something that would forever change everything. He was dusting Clara's old desk, the one she rarely used, when something caught his eye. A small leather-bound notebook, tucked beneath a stack of papers, lay partially hidden. It was unusual for Clara to keep things from him. She had always been open about everything. His heart beat faster as he slowly opened the notebook, the feeling of dread growing within him. The pages were filled with Clara's handwriting, neat and precise. At first, they seemed like the ramblings of an ordinary person, but the deeper he read, the more unsettled he became. The entries were about her past, about a life she had never spoken of, a life she had apparently tried to forget. The first few pages detailed Clara's early adulthood. She spoke about her first marriage, a man she loved deeply, but who had become distant and abusive over the years. The entries were painful to read, filled with sadness and regret. Clara described how she had left him after years of emotional torment, but she had never told anyone, not even her family. She had buried the pain deep inside her and moved forward, trying to forget the man who had once been the center of her world. As Jamal flipped through the pages, he found something that made his stomach churn. Clara had written about a dark secret, a secret that, according to her words, changed everything. It was clear that whatever this secret was, it had haunted her for years. She had written about a mysterious event that had taken place during her time living in another town. There were references to a crime, a cover-up, and an unthinkable betrayal that Clara had been forced to keep hidden. Jamal's hands trembled as he read on. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that Clara's past wasn't just filled with heartache. It was filled with secrets so dark and dangerous that it seemed almost impossible to believe. Clara had been involved in something much bigger than herself, something that had been buried for years. She had lived a life of silence, hiding the truth from everyone, even from the man she had married. One entry caught Jamal's attention. It read, "I can never tell anyone the truth about what happened. It would destroy everything I've worked for. If anyone knew, I would lose everything. My reputation, my friends, my safety." The words were chilling, and Jamal felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What had Clara been a part of? What was the truth she was hiding? Determined to understand more, Jamal continued reading, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. He came across a few more pages that were less about her past and more about her thoughts on their marriage. Clara had written about her fears of being judged for marrying someone so young, someone who had no idea what kind of burden she was carrying. She wrote about how much she cared for Jamal, how much she loved him, but how afraid she was to reveal the truth to him. The final entry was the most shocking of all. It described a meeting with someone from her past, someone who had been a key player in the dark events she had tried to bury. Clara had written about her fear of being discovered, of the consequences she would face if the truth came to light. But the last line stood out above all else. "I will never tell him. Not now, not ever. I can't bear to lose him. He's my only chance at happiness, and I can't let the truth destroy us." Jamal closed the notebook slowly, his mind reeling with the weight of what he had just discovered. His heart ached as he tried to comprehend the depth of Clara's pain. The woman he loved had been hiding a past that was filled with betrayal, regret, and fear. He couldn't believe what he had read, yet he knew that the notebook had revealed the truth. Clara had been running from something, and now it seemed that she was running from him too. The discovery had shattered the illusion of the perfect marriage Jamal had once believed in. The woman he had married, the woman he thought he knew, was not the same person he had imagined. But as Jamal stood there, the notebook heavy in his hands, he realized that the woman he had fallen in love with had been living in a prison of her own making. She had kept the secret not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that the truth would destroy everything. Jamal's heart broke for her, but the question remained. What would he do now that he knew the truth? Would he be able to forgive her? And more importantly, could their marriage survive the weight of her past? The days that followed Jamal's shocking discovery were filled with a heavy silence. The weight of the truth hung between him and Clara, unspoken yet deeply felt. Clara, though still physically present in their home, seemed distant, as if a part of her had already withdrawn, anticipating the confrontation that she knew would come. Jamal, on the other hand, struggled to find peace. The revelation of her hidden past weighed on his heart, and every time he looked at her, he was reminded of the painful truth she had been carrying for years. For the first time in their marriage, Jamal felt a gulf between them, one that he wasn't sure he could cross. He had loved Clara with all his heart, and the woman he had married was everything he had hoped for. Gentle, kind, wise, and strong. But the secret she had kept from him now seemed like an insurmountable barrier. The trust he once had in her was shattered, and with it, the foundation of their relationship seemed to crack. How could he continue to love someone who had kept such a dark secret from him? And yet, how could he turn his back on the woman who had been so good to him, who had shown him love when the world had offered him none? The days stretched on, each one filled with quiet contemplation. Jamal knew he had to talk to Clara. He could no longer live in silence, harboring the hurt and confusion that gnawed at his soul. So, one evening, as the sun began to set, he asked her to sit with him. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, but Jamal knew it was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it would be. Clara sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked weary, her face pale, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and regret. She had known this moment would come, and now that it was here, she was filled with a sense of dread. But as she met Jamal's gaze, she knew there was no escaping the truth any longer. "Jamal," she began, her voice soft, almost trembling. "I know you found the notebook. I should have told you everything from the start, but I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would leave me. I didn't want to lose you." Jamal's heart ached as he looked at her, the woman he had married. He could see the deep pain in her eyes, the guilt that had consumed her for so long. He had always known Clara to be a woman of strength, but now he saw her vulnerability, and it stirred something within him. A deep compassion for the woman who had been living in fear for so long. "I don't know what to think, Clara," Jamal said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you, but I feel like you've been hiding so much from me. I don't understand why you couldn't just trust me with the truth. Why didn't you let me in?" Clara's shoulders trembled as she fought back tears. "I didn't think I could bear the thought of losing you, Jamal," she whispered. "My past is filled with mistakes, things I'm not proud of, and I thought that if you knew, you wouldn't be able to love me anymore. I didn't want to be alone again. I didn't want to lose the happiness I found with you." Jamal looked at Clara, his mind racing with the emotions that swirled inside him. He had never imagined that the woman he had married had been carrying such a burden. He had always seen her as a source of strength, but now he realized that her strength had been born from years of hiding the truth. Clara had kept her past hidden not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that her past would define her, that it would destroy the love they shared. For a long moment, Jamal said nothing. He simply sat there, looking at Clara, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had learned. But then, slowly, something shifted within him. He realized that the woman sitting in front of him, the woman he had chosen to marry, was not perfect. But neither was he. They were both flawed, both carrying their own burdens, their own secrets, and yet they had found something beautiful in each other. In a world that had given them so little, they had found love. "I don't know if I can forget what I've learned," Jamal said softly, his voice full of pain. "But I do know that I love you, Clara. I love you, not just because of the good parts of you, but because of the broken parts too. We all have a past, and maybe it's not always pretty, but it doesn't have to define us. What matters now is what we choose to do moving forward. And I want to move forward with you." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to take his hand. "You're willing to forgive me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jamal nodded. "I'm not perfect, Clara. I've made mistakes too. And I can't promise that everything will be easy, but I can promise that I will try. I will try to understand, to forgive, and to love you through it all." A sob escaped Clara's lips, and she clung to Jamal, her tears soaking into his shirt. For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to cry, truly cry, releasing the weight of the years of guilt and fear that had burdened her soul. Jamal held her tightly, not judging, but simply offering her the comfort of his love. In that moment, they both knew that their journey wasn't over. It would be a long road, filled with challenges, but they had made the choice to walk it together. Jamal had learned the truth, and Clara had finally faced her past. But in each other, they had found a way to heal, to forgive, and to love once more. As they sat there, holding each other, the future no longer seemed so uncertain. The secrets that had once threatened to tear them apart had now become the foundation for their reconciliation. Together, they would rebuild, stronger and more united than ever before. And for the first time in a long while, both Clara and Jamal felt a sense of peace, a sense that, no matter what had come before, they had each other. And that was enough.